cartoon pretty much captures in 2012 what was happening in the world when I conducted the research aspects. If you go to the STEMTech site, you'll see a lot of the research behind how this was formed, how we decided the focus groups that we would support, and some of the political and other issues associated with the financial crisis that started in 2007 and 8, but by 2012 was really impacting a lot of the underserved regions in the world. So in the US specifically, 2/3 of all research is funded by government money. And when you take away all of the travel funds from those budgets because they're being squeezed, very few were traveling. And these were the problems that we were all faced with, not only in the US, but globally, obviously. So we decided we wouldn't compete for government money, which was very naive. And I occasionally write government grants, but I try not to compete. What I do is I go to a program director and convince them to give me money. So we're not competing. I crowdsource social capital since 2008, working exclusively with high-performance computing and data science. I've collected about 15,500 connections over several platforms. So when I write an article, I released one last week in HPC Wire. If you go to hpcwire.com and you see a picture of a dragon, that's my story. That was from the PRACE conference in Slovenia a few weeks ago. But with HPC Wire's 11,000 plus and 15,000 plus, which is a lot of overlap, those stories get out, and it's a good way to disseminate information. And we use that social capital to find mentors for students that have no expertise on their campus. So we can introduce them to, if they're interested in a very esoteric discipline, I can find mentors around the world that are willing to volunteer time to help them succeed. And we always have a pay it forward recommendation. It's not an obligation, but if we support your travel, we ask when you apply for the funds, we ask that you write a pay it forward proposal, how you plan to take the knowledge that you've learned and share it with others. And a lot of times that really tips the scale in the beneficiary's behalf, how creative those proposals are. And we focus on early career, but our programs our target groups are veterans. A lot of times, especially in the United States, if a veteran has a service obligation and they fall out of the workforce for 4 years, there's a gap, a training gap. So we like to help veterans, any workers that have been displaced by automation, which I think we're going to see more of with AI. The aging workforce, old people like me having a hard time finding a job, and people with disabilities. So it's amazing what technology can do for people with disabilities. So this is a group photo from our Supercomputing 17 workshop that we had that was co-located with the annual Supercomputing Conference. And the theme for this workshop was cybersecurity. And we had 50% from the US and 50% from Pan-African countries. 8 countries were represented from Africa, but 13 overall. And we always try to achieve 30% female participation, but that's really difficult in the HPC world. Now this young woman here is a network engineer, and she was selected to attend the Internet 2 Summit in San Diego earlier this month. And she's expressed an interest. Her pay it forward proposal was to become a leader for sub-Saharan Africa in the development of NRENs. So if you go to HPC Wire, there's a story that I wrote about the longest last mile. And I talk about what the status is of NREN development on the continent. And she's taken the lead to learn about peering and the development of advanced networks throughout Africa. But we have just a wealth of expertise here. A lot of, this is Dr. Happy Tola from the South African Center for High Performance Computing. He's the director there. In the back, you can barely see with the glasses, is Von Welch, who's the head guru for cybersecurity. for the US cyber infrastructure. This was Florence Hudson, and she was with Internet 2, formerly IBM. She's an Internet 2, or an Internet of Things cybersecurity expert. At ISC next week, I'm involved with a student program, and these are the 2 scholarship recipients that are going to be attending. Everybody knows about Breaking Bad. Okay, for those of you who don't, Breaking Bad was about a science teacher, a chemistry teacher, who his wife became ill, and he couldn't afford the insurance, he couldn't afford her medical care, so he decided to use his chemical expertise to cook methamphetamines. And he became the best cook in the world for this particular kind of drug. And Jesse was his protege, who was a high school dropout, who couldn't make the grade, but he was a whiz-bang with methamphetamines in the chemistry lab, so go figure. So my analogy here with the sysadmin, and now I'm going to get into workforce development, okay? This is where they took Jesse and they chained him to a lab, literally chained him and made him cook for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And with the funding cycle the way it is in Europe and in the US, it's often a 5-year funding cycle. Is it the same in Spain for government grants?
Yeah,
Because 5 years mirrors the warranty that is often available on hardware. So what happens is you hire someone that's I call him a unicorn, who's the best cook, the best sysadmin, the best cybersecurity, the person that wears all the hats. That's Jesse, and you tie him to the machine for 5 years, and they get burned out. So that's my analogy with Breaking Bad. It's kind of a good analogy, isn't it? If you've known anybody like this, it gets tiresome, because what happens then, as the machine ages, maintenance is more time-consuming, and you have less time to teach faculty and staff how to use the system. So it's really toward the end of the machine's life, your program's starting to fail. So it's a bad model, and it's not good for continuity or long-term sustainability as far as your workforce. So with STEM Track, what we try to do is offer, because of this 5-year funding cycle mill that chews people up and spits them out, we try to create a sustainable, a place where people can go to find like-minded colleagues and mentors and more. And this is a snapshot from our Facebook community, and you can see pretty much where people fall, the age group, demographic. And the demographic I'm concerned with the most for this presentation are the early career, but the late career are very important because they mentor, we encourage them to mentor the early career. But the early career are traditionally and I've been working very, very diligently to bring more women in. Believe me, I go out and I grab them. But it's 70% male this point in time, and predominantly what I'm calling Generation Y. Now this was a presentation, and if anyone asks, I'll give you a link. This is worth watching if you're involved with HR at all. Human resources for IT and HPC. But in a nutshell, this presentation, which was for higher education marketing specifically, but because this is the demographic that I'm concerned with, Generation Y is 80 million strong, and that's just in the US. Born between 1980 and 2000. So globally, it's the largest generation, and it's even bigger than the baby boom generation, which ruined it for everybody else. Yeah, we know. I'm sorry. But they fancy a healthy lifestyle, they crave adventure, they seek pure affirmation, they're hooked on social media, and they're impatient. And these are all qualities to remember as you employ and try to keep employees happy, because by 2025, 3/4 of the world's workers will fall into this category. They believe in cause marketing, and I think that's why STEM Trek has been popular, because we take a stand as a grassroots initiative, non-political, and I think that's very favorable. to this demographic specifically. And they move around, and that goes back to a patient's 3 years. I'm going to a retirement party for David Stack that I showed you in an earlier slide. He will have been with the University of Wisconsin for 33 years. And that's rare anymore. People don't stay in one place for 33 years. So how many of you have been in your job for 5 years or more? So about 4 or 5. 10 years or more? 3, 4, 20 years? No? What? I was in one job for 22 years, but I'm a baby boomer. So, and the debt. Students have on average now, in the US, it's closer to 39,000. This is an older slide. 55,000 in the UK. That's debt, with an uncertain employment outlook, which is just very frightening. And after the 2008 crash, global crash economy, it became popular to offer short-term contracts. So that's why this presentation is titled Chasing Unicorns in the Global Gig Economy. The gig economy is where you work a gig for 10 months, maybe 2 years at best. And a lot of them are little stopgap grants. And I've been doing that since 2012. And it's not fun, I can tell you that. So how many would classify themselves as a gig employee now, working short-term? Everybody has a good job with benefits? Wow, that's awesome. I'm moving to Spain. Yeah, because it's really difficult right now, and that seems to be, by 2020, 40% will be temporary, because you can save 40% on your benefits and your overhead if you do short-term contracts. And so that's driving the decisions from a corporate standpoint, because they don't want to pay any more than they have to. It's performance-driven, less recruiting. And as far as the employee, you get to work from home, you can be selective, and you can negotiate your rate. But not all of us are good negotiators. They don't teach us that in school. So it's not for everybody. And the pitfalls are many, and I think the biggest amount of pitfalls are for the employee. And because we are social creatures, how many of you work from home? And keep your hand up if you work from home and you don't have a spouse or a family with you. So it's lonely, and we're social creatures. We need that social connection. And the outcome of that is longer period, well, we're seeing more unemployment, especially the older you get. People my age tend to have longer periods of unemployment because we're getting harder to place. And more discrimination. And working with STEM Trek, I see, people tell me what their problems are, and I hear a lot of veiled discrimination against women, minorities, people with disabilities, older people. It's got a toehold, and it's running around right now. And as part of it is this gig economy. And the uncertainty, and how that translates to the millennial generation is fewer are buying homes, fewer are getting married. They're living with their parents longer, which delays their parents' retirement. And these are all things that have an impact on society in general. But one of the biggest problems that is just starting to become known is a lack of loyalty. And I'll get into that a little bit more in detail. But it's an anxious demographic in general. I have 2 children that fall into this category. Both are very anxious. How this has, it's created the opioid crisis, which is rampant where I come from. It's the leading cause of death for that age group right now, and a lot of alcoholism as well, because I come from a very economically constrained region. And it's just, a whole host of problems. It's just not good for society in general. But if you're all working jobs with good benefits, maybe I'll move to Spain.
Well, this doesn't represent Spain as you think.
No, that's good. That's good. So, but as far as unicorns, which are the people who I would say a unicorn in an enterprise is someone who started working as a student employee and has developed expertise with a broad range of applications across an enterprise. Those employees are really hard to find. The man that is retiring that I told you about, he's a unicorn. He spent time as a network engineer, as a sysadmin. He was the CIO before he retired. So he came up through the ranks and he knows where all the bodies are hidden in the enterprise. Those are really hard to find. And applying the marketing research that I showed you earlier, there was a case where a 9-year veteran at the University of Cape Town had worked up through the ranks as a student, and he was a sysadmin. He also trained the student team that won first place 3 out of 5 years at the International Supercomputing Conference. He took a job with the Texas Advanced Computing Center in the United States. The talent search through the Human Resources Department, they did the traditional search for an employee, and they tried twice over a 2-month period, and they only drew 3 applications and none were qualified. So I said, would you like me to try something different? So I offered to help. I used our social capital, and instead of expecting people to come to look for a job post at the University of Cape Town, I applied a push strategy where I pushed it out as basically an article of interest. And whereas HR, again, that's a watering hole where you got the people that are coming to look for a job are people that are probably unemployed, and that doesn't mean they're not as good, but they're looking for work, whereas I pushed it out. So people that were maybe not really thinking about moving, I planted a few seeds of thought. And this was a blog post. Now the red arrows were not on the page, that's just for this illustration. But I appealed to the aspects of the millennials, what was important to them. A sense of adventure in this photograph. I talked about the beauty of Cape Town and the region, and that you can go hiking on the weekends, and it's just absolutely breathtaking. I featured a picture of a young woman coming in the door. This is the director. You know, he's welcoming women as well. That's 50% of your potential. So yes, women are welcome. This title has to do with competition. They're very competitive. They like games. So do you have what it takes to be an HPC engineer? That was to appeal to their competitive nature. This is a snapshot of the technology itself, so they knew what tools they'd have access to. They had launched a new supercomputer, and it was pretty exciting. It was the biggest, fastest computer on the African continent. So that would be your playground, basically. So that was a big plus. I said I would apply if I were qualified to give it my personal endorsement. And then I showed a picture of the student team. If you don't like working with students, you probably shouldn't apply, because that's a big part of what this person did. And they received 22 qualified applications in 8 days versus 3 in 2 months. So just that strategy alone was highly effective. You have to remember that anyone that is of unicorn status could make twice as much in industry if you represent a university. How many of you are with universities right now? Okay, so if you represent a university, you've got a big struggle in that your staff could earn up to twice as much, and that's pretty much a global condition. And soft money, people avoid it if they can. They don't want to work on a 5-year grant. They want stability, if at all possible. Childcare, maternity leave, family time is very important for both men and women. And peer recognition, other things that you could add to sweeten the pot, such as free gym memberships and professional development. Offer them 2 conferences a year. That's all stuff that people really enjoy, and it's being cut elsewhere. But that's a good way to get people engaged and get them to stay. And then you have to ask, do you really need a unicorn? Maybe you don't. I've worked as a campus champion. I certainly don't have a technical background, but I'm able to talk to scientists and point them in the right direction as far as technical resources. I've learned enough as a communications specialist and external relations specialist to understand that much. So oftentimes people that don't have the high-end technical skill sets are actually cheaper, except for me. I would be very expensive now. But grow your own. Again, focus on the workforce early. I would say globally that's a trend right now. Certainly was a message at PRACE when it was Leonardo Andres from the European Commission presented the status of cyber infrastructure in Europe in Slovenia 2 weeks ago. One of the audience members said, your roadmap for the future doesn't include any education, and this is an oversight. And this is the same thing I've heard in the US. We need to start earlier, and we need to incorporate these advanced skills in the curriculum in all disciplines, as many as possible. No longer an esoteric aspect of computer science. It needs to be broader. And again, look under the long tail, because as the soft sciences and underrepresented domains become engaged with high-performance computing and data science, those are skills that are up and coming. And a lot of times those practitioners have better interpersonal skills, not to generalize, but physicists don't always have great interpersonal skills, nor do engineers. That's a generalization, but it's one that I've found to be true, I'm sorry. So people from the arts and humanities, social sciences, economics, they may have the combination that you need. And again, they may be tied to the region and the university in general, and they might stay around for a while. And I also advocate cherry picking, going, you know, that used to be dirty pool. Nobody did that, but now I say if you see someone that would work for your team and they're not happy, they're fair game. Make them an offer. And this, I just had to get this off my chest. This was posted on LinkedIn 2 weeks ago, and it was, and again, we're condemning an entire country here, China. The tech companies in China are hiring programming cheerleaders to offer comfort to the programmers as they work. And what is wrong with this picture? As we try to engage more women, I said, this is death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every time I see this, something like this, it hurts, because I know I had just finished writing an article about the PRACE Ada Lovelace Award winner, who is a young woman from China, who was brilliant, and she, you know, this is such a disservice to her. So I don't condemn all of China. I'm sure it's one company within China, but it's not cool. So we need to not show stuff like this or think it's funny, because these women would probably be great programmers, or at least one of 4 might be. You never know. So don't discount your women, 50% of your workforce potential. And you know, in my experience with training, out of a general audience of, say, general studies, you might have 250 prospects, maybe 2 or 3 become programmers and excel at it. But if one is a woman and you don't make it comfortable for her to engage and come up through the ranks, you've lost her potential forever. So that's so important. And I know the skills are equally distributed. Techtopia is a concept that I thought about, oh gosh, this was back in 2015. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool for these underserved regions to create a community where technical workers could work from home for free or low cost while they paid off their debt, and in exchange for training in underserved areas. And when Jordy told me about how this center was built and offers breaks to people that are otherwise disadvantaged as far as access to resources, that's very much the same type of concept. But this would be in a rural community, and we've been doing research on the actual location. It was where I grew up, actually. And it's not that far from fiber. We're going to be able to bring fiber in. There's a state facility that was closed in 2002 that has development potential. There are major research labs conveniently located within 2 hours in several directions on fairly good transportation routes. So it wouldn't be that hard to bring talent in that maybe could work from home in a rural environment. And again, the perk will be to pay off your student debt, that $39,000 average debt, $55,000 in the UK. So that's a model that I hope to get going this year, actually. And one of the things, how's my time?
15 minutes.
Okay, good, right on target. Because I don't draw a salary from STEM Trek, I do odd jobs to keep my skills fresh, my byline fresh, and also to bring in new communities of practice into STEM Trek. And Frank Perry is a lawyer that I have edited his work for many years. He's a JD lawyer. He's a certified fraud evaluator and a CPA. And he asked me to edit a book that he's been writing for the past 10 years that focuses on white-collar crime. And as I was preparing my presentation for this and editing this book, I thought, wow, you know, having worked in enterprise computing and research computing for as long as I have, I could connect the dots between how white-collar crime as it has appeared through the Enron, Wells Fargo, some of the other global catastrophes where executives have basically robbed citizens of billions of dollars. Those cases are all outlined in this book. I began to think about how a bad person in a research computing environment might exploit weak controls. And I asked if I could put some slides in this, and he said, sure. So basically, in a nutshell, as his book, it's riveting. I couldn't sleep. A couple of the chapters, I was terrified, because how this manifests in a white-collar environment, basically there are people of a criminal mindset set across society. 1% have no empathy. So that 1% gravitates toward situations they can control and manipulate for personal greed or other reasons. And in a research computing environment, that can be very, very devastating, and it can take years to determine what it is they've actually done, and I'll get into that. But you know them when you see them, and as I edit the book, I've recognized people that I've met in the workplace. Charming, impression management. But one of the things for managers to understand is that they show a manager a different face than they show the subordinates. So if you listen to your subordinates and there's a disconnect, you'll know that one is at work in your organization. And why I'm bringing this up in this context is the weak controls in research computing come when you are in an underserved capacity. Your government's cutting back, your staff is very thin. You may have 5 employees where you had 20 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Those are essentially weak controls. You don't have as many people watching what's going on. But as an HR specialist or a manager, you'll recognize the charm. You may witness the lack of empathy. And a tendency to rationalize and to blame others if something goes wrong. It's never their fault. But what was really interesting to me as I edited this, and Perry has experience as a public defender, so he works with the street level crime, but he also works with evaluation of fraud. He connects the dots. Basically, they're the same. There is no difference between a street level criminal and a white collar criminal. They both look for opportunities to exploit. And 25% in the prisons are psychopaths, although 1% of society is, but 25% in prisons. So that shows you that, but the ones you really have to worry about are the ones that don't get caught. because they become politicians or they become heads of businesses. So, and again, they're going to look for ways to find weak controls. In an enterprise, the ones that I have the most experience with, I would say it's the number 2 position that authorizes payment, it buys hardware, and also protects data. That's a position that you could make money off of if you were a bad person. And they know it's because it's socially acceptable crime, they're rarely punished, so there's a chance that they bounce around. So you may get a psychopath that almost succeeded at this institution, but then it came to yours, and they may get a little more traction there. The lack of loyalty that I talked about earlier in the gig economy, you're not seeing that institutional loyalty anymore. And if you look at the interviews in the book of why they did it, why did they steal all of these pensions from Enron, etc., they more or less feel like they're the victims. They feel that others are worthy of being exploited. So that's a mindset that seems to be, there's just no loyalty there, or care, or empathy. And I think in an enterprise, I thought about this long and hard, and I think that's going to be a chapter in the next version of this book. How would I, if I were in that number 2 position, how could you exploit those weak controls? You could sell data, you could sell access, you could sell computational time, you could create a Bitcoin mining operation in a closet with decommissioned hardware. I mean, the list is long of how a technical resource in an enterprise could do a lot of damage. And if you're selling intellectual property, it might take years before that's mitigated and discovered. And until they are actually caught, that person could be well down the road. So something to be aware of, and why I wanted to bring it up in this context. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Thomas Sterling's book. And I don't get a cut for these books, by the way. Now, actually, the fraud book the STEM Trek may see a little from that if it sells well, but certainly not this one. This one I'm promoting because it's an awesome resource. This book by Thomas Sterling, Matthew Anderson, and was it Brodowitz. Anyone familiar with Thomas Sterling, Beowulf fame? He's a big icon, often front and center at supercomputing. He'll be at ISC next week. But this book was subsidized by the U.S. National Science Foundation. It's available under $100. I bought 2 copies the other day for $75 off of Amazon. Students anywhere around the world can get academic credit transferred to their university from Indiana University under Dr. Sterling's program. And it's, this is the ISBN available, Hoffman Publishing. And the only thing that I found that is limiting is it costs $40 to ship to Nepal, but it probably wouldn't be as bad to ship it to Spain, or you could pick up a copy elsewhere. But watch for it used. But it's wonderful, and it's so affordable because it was heavily subsidized by a U.S. federal agency. But this is pretty much the best resource as far as self-driven HPC skills that are available. But if you go to the STEM Trek site, there is a link to this book and a number of other online resources that are available for free as well, that other cyber infrastructures have promoted and allowed us to use or to link to for free. And if you shop on Amazon, Amazon Smile, do you get Amazon?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, if you sign up for Amazon Smile and choose STEM Trek as your favorite charity, we get a small percentage of the sales. So if you buy your computers or cameras or any high value items, please register. And it's a very tiny percent, but it's something. It's better than nothing. So anyway, that's all I have today. I saw a question somewhere. Did somebody have a question? No?
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
I wanted to say one more thing about blockchain. I forgot to mention blockchain when we got disrupted at the beginning. I asked who was involved with blockchain, and I know that the man from Pfizer said that his team is working with blockchain. Is anyone else working with blockchain? I have a good authority that you may need very soon. Actually, there's some exciting stuff happening this summer. The Consumer Goods Forum met in Singapore the same week Trump was meeting with North Korea, so it didn't get any press, but I have a good authority that they are moving forward about how some were hacked and they rise and they fall in value. It's another byproduct of the bad economy. People put more faith in cryptocurrency than they do national currencies. But the development for cryptocurrency is reaching a new level to where it will be more sustainable, scalable, and secure. And the third generation in Q4 of 18 is being exploited for the Consumer Goods Forum and a number of other industries that are moving forward with it. One of the most interesting cases is medical marijuana, because that's a high-value agricultural commodity. It also involves human data and a supply chain. You have to be very careful with every step of the supply chain. So that is a high-end example of how blockchain will be used, not only blockchain itself, but secure databases. So if you're not involved, I'm guessing if I came back in 3 years, half of you will be. So it's good to keep an eye on it. Our next workshop in July of 19 will have a blockchain theme. So please watch STEM Track and apply, because we will probably, funds permitting, we'll have about anywhere from 30 to 60 supported delegates. And that will be in Chicago. So you can come see where I live. Okay, that's it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any questions?